Mark, welcome. How are we?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I know you've driven a long way to come up to do this today, so I really appreciate it.
No problem.
So you're CTO for Cohesity.
I am.
Yes. And for anyone who doesn't know who might be watching, Cohesity is a leading data security and data management platform, and we're going to hopefully today really get into the crux of backup and data protection, not from a salesy way, hopefully to give some real insight into people about what other people are doing and what trends that we are both seeing within the marketplace. But before we get to that, I'm always interested how people got to the position they're in today. So there isn't many probably young men with a twinkle in their eye thinking, I want to be CTO for a data management and security platform. So where did your journey start and how did you end up here?
Long journey.
Yeah. Or just give us the highlights.
So as you say, I'm the EMEA CTO. So obviously my focus is across the whole EMEA region. I came into this role from 3 years at Dell doing a similar role, effectively business development CTO. So talking about outcomes, business outcomes with customers, understanding what it is that they do, why they do it, how they do it, and then aligning what we would do to shape the right outcomes for them using our product set. And then obviously I moved across to Cohesity to do a similar thing, got a little bit more niche obviously in data protection, security and data insights, but a lot more exciting based on what my background was. Now leading me into that, I started my career in the 90s at Barclays Bank. So I was a programmer. In fact, originally I was a data input clerk, so I'd sit there typing in numbers all day. Wow. And when I was at school, I always wanted to do something to do with computers, as it was at the time. You know, I'd started my time off on a Commodore 64, bit of basic coding, playing games, and then data input at the bank. Took the IT aptitude tests, got into programming. So I was a COBOL programmer, assembler programmer, got into doing Oracle database administration. Then I started building servers and client server domains using OS2, if you remember that. I then moved into Unisys at an outsource operation on check clearing, doing something similar, then working in the back office. Then I started getting much more into servers, storage, started to run the server teams. And then eventually that evolved into a bigger role at Barclays, where I started running their storage team. And at the end of my Barclays tenure, I was a director there, running group storage, public cloud operations, and their whole virtual estate globally. Wow. So, yeah, my evolution into where I was pretty much from junior IT all the way up to senior.
So how did you end up in vendor world? You've obviously went from one side of the fence to the gamekeeper, isn't it?
It's very much like that. Yeah. I mean, especially if you think, if I was asked to work on the Barclays account, I'd know it quite well. But obviously, I don't do that. But when I was working on the customer side, it allowed me to pick up so many skills that you wouldn't necessarily have got that. You work as a technician in a vendor and you're usually focused on the product, you're focused on software, you're focused on hardware, you're focused on sales or whatever. At a customer, you do all that. And you do people management and you do budgets and you do financial forecasting and you do hiring and firing and disciplinary capability, grievances. You do literally everything. So when I was coming to the end of my time at Barclays, I was like, I've got all these skills and I feel as though I'm like pent up about to, I need to use these skills for the right things. And when I moved across to the first vendor, it just allowed me to suddenly start to go into this skill set that I knew I had, but I'd not been able to properly use before. I felt all I was doing was emails and, bits and bobs. I was obviously adding value, or at least I felt I was. It was a big role. It's 70, 80 million budget a year. So it was a big role. But you just feel as though you repeat. You go into the vendor and you're speaking to different customers every day and you can see what their problems are because I've ran operations, I've ran engineering teams. I can understand what it is that they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve, what their frustrations are. But I can also then nicely slot in what our capabilities are and what the capabilities of our partners are and how we can bring that whole ecosystem to the customers to allow them to be able to achieve those outcomes.
I think there's a lot of empathy. I came from a corporate law background, so I was not as grand a title as you, but I was an infrastructure guy within a corporate law firm, then went over to the VAR side, then ultimately into kind of cloud service providers. And it's amazing a lot of people, especially in vendor land, forget about the reality of what our customers are facing.
Yeah.
And you hit the nail on the head there. That project you're into speaking to them about is very important to you, but that might be 2% of their week.
Oh, 100%.
And having that understanding, actually, they're dealing with loads of different things. Yes, they might not be getting back to me, but that's because they've got 15 other fires, and this project is important, but it's one project of 30.
Yeah.
I think a lot of vendors forget that.
They do. And when I first came into the company, I was asked the question, what makes a good sales guy? Or, what did you like about sales? What didn't you like about sales? And I'm like, well, okay, how long have you got? I can list it off because I've dealt with 20 vendors at a time. I know what my good ones and what my bad ones look like. But, I give a good example of what you were just saying there. I worked on a project with one of the major hardware and software vendors. And for them, it was a 6-month engagement from sale to completion. And it was the biggest sale that they'd ever done in the EMEA region. And I think it was top 3 in the world, this deal. Come to the crux of the deal, we had a 2-week window to get the thing closed, 18-hour days, lawyers involved, all the usual stuff. Close the deal, great. That, for me, that was 2 weeks' work. And it wasn't part of my pay plan. It wasn't part of my reward. It wasn't part of anything that I was measured against. It was just something else. Come across to to vendor land, and I speak to the guys that had been there that are now working with me, as it turns out, and they were like, massive deal. This is what we got paid. We went to a club. We did this, and this, and I'm like, well, I went home and I went to the chip shop, and that was me done. It's having that appreciation, I think, of what a customer is doing on a day-to-day basis is supremely important for salespeople. I think they sometimes don't realise that the sun doesn't, it doesn't revolve around them.
Yeah.
They're just one piece of the puzzle. And actually, the best way that you can work with a customer is understanding what it is, what are they about, what is their reward plan, what does that performance review look like, what does it contain?
Can you fix something?
Exactly. Is me making this project as simple as possible for you going to get you the reward that you need that year?
Yeah. No,
build that rapport.
Absolutely. We see it time and time again. So in terms of backup, I've had the privilege or misfortune of being involved in backup my whole career, from being an IT admin looking after backup into multiple different service providers running different backup as a service scenarios, and now with Data Vita we offer a whole range of data protection outfits, and I speak to a lot of customers, and data protection always comes up. One of the areas that really still surprises me and concerns me is the false confidence people have because they have a backup software in place. So any of the main major backup vendors, there's about 6 or 7 that you could rattle through, and the customer say, yeah, I have this in place, and you ask 3 or 4 questions, and they think by simply having it, they are ultimately protected against all eventualities. Is that something that kind of you're seeing when you're out speaking to customers? Yeah, absolutely. It's probably the number one thing that customers tell me 100% of the time. And I haven't met one customer that does it properly. No. And there's a variety of reasons for that. You can say that it's down to a poor team or the poor business or a poor understanding of what it is that they're doing, but ultimately it comes down to a lack of standard, a lack of process, and a lack of testing, and also a lack of understanding between the business and the technology teams. A lot of it's head in the sand as well. And one of the most dangerous aspects of that misconception is that it's then fed into the senior management of companies. The IT guy says, I'm 100% protected, so I'm 100% protected. Yeah. And they don't understand that potentially the biggest asset, which is data, is vulnerable. Exactly. That's it in a nutshell. The IT guy will say, I'm 100% protected because he's 100% sure based on what he knows. Yeah. So his 100% knowledge might actually only be 20% of the business. And that's the issue. If you go back to the basics of it, why do companies have these gaps? They have these gaps because of siloed operations. The business is essentially a silo. IT is essentially a silo. Now, when I did this for a living, it's given me the luxury to be able to ask the right questions to the customers, because obviously when I did it, I knew that my requests coming in for the business were basically, I need you to back this up.
It wasn't, I need you to back up this relevant record for this length of time for these reasons, and you can't do that one, but you can do this one. And each time it changes, I'm going to tell you, and we're going to review it on a regular basis, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't that. It was back this up. Okay, no worries. There was no process.
Yeah.
So when it came to testing it, it would be, well, we're missing this because we added this in 6 months ago, and we're missing this because we forgot to tell you, and you're missing this because you didn't configure this properly and we didn't check it. And there's the gap.
Yeah.
And that's part of where, going back to what I was saying originally, having the standard for data protection and recovery is critical for data resilience, because unless you have that standard in place, you don't have that governance. If I'm a business owner, I want to know that my data is 100% protected, and I'm responsible for that data.
Is there such a thing? Is 100% protected, do you think? How deep's your pockets, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I'd say you can get to 100%, but you're going to pay.
Back it up to tape and bury it in your garden.
You're going to pay for perfection.
Yeah.
And again, backing up is one thing, recovering is another. So yeah, you could lash a load of money into tape and stick it into a company externally, and it's brilliantly protected. But then it's going to take you days to get it back, or weeks or months. So then you're back into resiliency categories. Well, okay, I can't put my top end data onto tape because it's going to take too long to bring it back. As great as a cheap medium it is, it has to be online. So if it's online, what am I then doing with those systems? Where's my single points of failure? How am I backing that up? Am I replicating it? Is it going to just replicate whatever mess is here to here? There's so much more that then goes with it. But I think ultimately it does. As an IT guy, I used to hate audit because they'd come in and ask me all sorts of awkward questions about process. But ironically, standard process and testing is the right answer for getting the right things in place. Because I think if you're a business unit and you're responsible for your data, why wouldn't you want to know that, number one, it's been correctly articulated to the IT team. Number two, they've actually done it. Number three, you've tested it. And number four, you've gone back every year or every 6 months and checked it, and checked it, and checked it. And there's an approval process.
Absolutely. And I think IT people struggle with that process. They want to deploy technology. They don't want to deal with process. And interestingly, there's been research recently published between 2019 and 2023, so a 5-year period, just about. There has been over 800,000 companies admitting to a loss of data, which is 6 in every 10 organisations within the UK, which is absolutely staggering. And it might actually be higher than that, where people don't know they've lost data or aren't willing to admit that they've lost data. But when you drill into that, we like to talk about, and rightly so, we like to talk about the latest threats to your data. So ransomware and what's the latest protections, and the threat of AI-powered cyber attacks. The vast majority of data is lost by human error.
Yes.
Then after that, it's hardware failure. Then after that, it's unexpected power outages. Then the malicious aspect of data loss is a tiny, tiny percentage. But if we're being honest, and we do the same as well at Data Vita, when we are talking to customers, it's all about, are you protected against ransomware? Are you protected about this? Well, there's a more fundamental question. What scenarios can you recover from, and what scenarios are you protected from?
Exactly. Yeah, like you said, your biggest weakness is the human element. Even on the security side, your biggest weakness is the human element. I think the human element's always been the biggest challenge in standard data protection and recovery, for all the reasons we said before, because nobody knows everything, but also because mistakes do happen. It is easy to misconfigure something. It is easy for the server to drop a drive. It's easy for a backup policy that looks amazing because it runs once a day to back up your master server, to then see a failure halfway during the working day. You've lost half the data for that day. Where'd you get it from? You can't. So there's a bunch of scenarios that you can protect against, but you have to have an organised way of doing backup. Like you were saying there, I think if you were putting a backup protection scheme in today, immutability would be key, but not just the immutability side. It would be role-based access control, multi-factor authentication. It would be quorum to make sure that multiple people can actually approve changes to the backup systems. I'll call them heritage. Most heritage data protection providers don't do that.
No.
They don't do all of it. They do some, a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Or it's massively complicated.
Yeah, it's hugely complicated. And also, they don't go backwards. So great, I can turn encryption on from now. What about all the data that I've been backing up for 10 years, not encrypted? So what happens there? It's not like the old days where you can just go and pull tapes and start clicking off the little plastic tab on it.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah, no, that's a risk. I think in terms of, as we go through this, the old war stories will probably come out at some point, but your point on testing, one of the prime examples of we've seen of this with a customer, and this is from many moons ago with different organisations. So we had a customer who was backing up, and it was a massive estate, and they were getting their backup reports through 100% successful, 100% successful. But what had actually happened somewhere in the distant past, someone had been in messing about with the backups and changed them. So the job was running and it was completing successfully, but it wasn't backing anything up.
Yeah.
And it was actually just going through the pre-backup process at Commvault, I think, at the time. So it was going back through and kind of indexing everything and updating everything. But for some reason, the next part of the backup job of actually writing the data to the media hadn't went, and it was about 9 months before they actually noticed that this long-term archive had been completing successfully every day, and they were automatically picking up with a monitoring system into a service desk tool, and all that service tool was looking for was backup job complete. Yep. Now, if somebody had opened that, they would have seen that it took 8 minutes and had a 0 byte size. So it just shows you the importance of don't rely on your monitoring systems. Yep. And testing.
Exactly, and it's wood for the trees as well. You know, even if you had a monitoring system in place, and if it was, let's say it was a human monitoring system, how do you know to look for that when you've got 10,000 jobs a day? You just, you know, you're going to automatically go to your failures and your missed and not your successfuls. So would you ever have found that? And, you know, you could use AI now. You know, you've got a good operational level of AI that could go in there, but you still have to have the wits about you to set a trigger point to say, well, actually, the usual runtime for this job is 2 hours and it's completed in 8 minutes.
And that's one of the things the team do like about Cohesity within our backup as a product service. It warns you about if there's a difference between two previous backups in terms of, well, it's been consistently this amount of data for this amount of time, then all of a sudden you've either got a high percentage change rate, so that would point to ransomware, or there's very little data there. So obviously that's designed to highlight ransomware, but it also catches a hold of other stuff in terms of that human error.
Exactly.
So why is it went from being a 4-hour backup job to 0? And it warns you to say, is this right? And I think functions and features like that.
Proactive operations.
Yeah. That's
the kind of thing that you want to have within your backup group, is that proactive capability. It's you need to look here, even if it doesn't do anything. Look here, this is a problem. This doesn't look right compared to yesterday.
It might be fine, but
exactly. And I've had a customer conversation around Oracle backups. Same sort of example as yours. They were getting successful return codes back from an Oracle backup right in direct to tape. Tape gets written data to, off it goes to the external storage. Jobs are good, and months later they come back. It turns out it's never been doing anything. It's just been running successful return code, no data backed up.
Yeah, I think that's probably more common than people realise.
Exactly, and it's because of the complexities of IT. You know, if you go into a big corporation, enterprise, strategic customer, the database team's not part of the storage team, where typically the backup group sits. And neither's the Unix team or the Windows team or any other infrastructure groups, because they're all siloed and they've all got their own requirements. You know, if you're going through a set of recoveries, everyone focuses on the business data. Nobody tends to focus on where you're going to get the copy of AD or DNS or any of that from, because usually they're recovering into an existing DR environment. So even with that, they're not thoroughly testing their capabilities.
Yeah, no.
And again, without a standard, you don't know to do that.
No, you don't. The buzzword, and you've already touched on it, immutability. So if you look on any backup products, immutability fixes everything. It absolutely doesn't. No. So I guess in simplistic terms, what is immutability?
Immutability is, for me, a bunch of things. You know, immutability is the ability to write a piece of data and not have it touched. But as I said earlier, it has to include other elements to it. So if you've got immutable data, you've got a piece of data that can't be amended or changed or touched, right? But you also can't delete it. So you have to have a data log function in there that says, although I can't delete this data or touch it or alter it, it's only for a fixed period because a relevant record applies to it. So, I talk to a lot of customers and they say to me, I've got to keep that data forever. No, you don't. You don't need to keep any data forever. You need to keep it for as long as the company's relevant record policy says you need to keep it. And that's what you define in your backup system. Hardly any customers trace that from the top of the company to the bottom of the company, right? So you end up with data being kept forever. So within immutability, you need that data lock capability to say, at this date, the data expires and deletes. It isn't just hanging around somewhere, because that's just as bad. But then you've got the other elements to immutability. So if you want to do anything in there, you need a quorum capability. So more than one person can four-eyes a change on it. And you need the multi-factor authentication capability. You need roles-based access. So again, if you are a backup administrator, should you be able to go in there and play with that data that doesn't really belong to you, it belongs to the business. So shouldn't there be somebody else in there that's doing that? So I think immutability is quite a lot of pieces brought together for the right solution. But I think the biggest challenge I'm seeing when I talk to customers is heritage providers have told them that it must be immutable, and they've clicked on the immutability switch. Now you've got a problem, because what happens if you do, say, a simple GDPR subject access request? I want to delete my data from last year because I'm not part of the company anymore. Can't do it because it's immutable. And you've not got data lock in there to expire it.
No,
and even if you do, you don't know I'm leaving. So how have you set that expiry? You've got to wait until it life's out, which is 2 years or whatever.
For some people, it might even be longer than that. The immutability has lots of holes in it from what we are seeing. So the by far the biggest obvious one, we've seen customers cut out with this. They buy a appliance which is immutable. So if you were to directly access that, you wouldn't be able to change the data. If someone gets the admin password and bricks it, it's not immutable. And there is a misconception that immutable means that you can drive a tank over it and it will still be there. If you don't have the policies and processes around what you were saying, the quorum, can one person format a box? Is there cooling off periods involved in it? All of these things that need to be built in to give you time to react.
Exactly. Can an engineer from a storage vendor go into the back and twist a key and lose everything? Of course he can. And that's the difference between, are you immutable or not? You still need to have what goes back to basic data protection and recovery capabilities on any immutable data.
Then the next misconception, these are all things that we talk about customers. So again, I've got a long heritage with NetApp. I have petabytes of the stuff. But we often get in conversations where people were saying, I use snapshots to back up. They're immutable. It's like, okay, what do you do with snapshots? I use SnapMirror. Great, okay. And how long do you keep them for? Keep them for 2 weeks. All your data's locked. Someone's been quietly working away, locking all your data. You're replicating all your data and you've got 2 weeks worth of snapshots and everything gets locked down. Then what? And there is no answer to that. You're screwed at that point. And I think people have to understand the technologies they're using and the policy impacts it has. So NetApp snapshots have got me out of more holes than I care to discuss. They're a great instant recovery capability. Can I get these 50 VMs back online? There was corruption. Fantastic for that. However, as a long-term use of data retention and backup, technology like that, if used the wrong way, can be very, very dangerous.
It can be. It can be, and it can be very costly as well. Snapshots are great, but it's full of white space, and they just get bigger and bigger and bigger. There are modern technologies that can counter that, but typically people aren't doing that. So what you're ending up doing is costing yourself an absolute fortune, keeping stuff that you don't need. And again, what's in that you shouldn't be keeping? There's going to be stuff that you should be keeping. There's going to be stuff that you shouldn't be keeping. Anything that you shouldn't be keeping, if it flags up, then you've got fines on your hands.
Absolutely. So I guess moving on from the immutability piece, ransomware is by far the hottest topic that we're seeing just now. How are you seeing the propagation of threats coming through? Because I think a lot of people misconstrue how a ransomware attack actually comes about. It can be a year-long process sometimes.
I think the probably low key is the word for it, I would say. I think when you...
Until it's not.
When you talk to customers about ransomware, especially when they've got limited experience of actually running through a process themselves where they've been they've had a cyber event or they've been hacked or whatever, they articulate it to me as if a bus has been driven through the front door of the data center.
Yeah.
And I say to them, it isn't like that. The chances are it's happening now. You don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's low key. Because it's typically they'll get access into the system somehow, and then they'll be lie dormant. A standard attack vector is actually to do nothing for weeks. Because once you're in there, you'll get detected if they've got the right systems on. So don't do anything. Sit there, loiter, touch a couple of things that don't mean anything, see what happens. If nothing happens, then they start to do what they're doing. And that's where software like ours comes in, because you're looking at secondary data. We're not looking at the periphery, the edge, to stop the people coming in. What we're doing is saying, well, okay, if they're in, wouldn't you like to know? And we've got access to this massive pool of secondary data. So we can tell within that data, we can do threat detection, anomaly hunting, we can look at fingerprinting, we can do all sorts of stuff. So when they're in there doing this low-key poking around, companies like us can see that. But that's what customers need to realise. They're in there, they're looking at things, they're plotting, and they're going to target the one thing that's going to get you out of jail, which is data protection. It isn't about just stealing bank records or personal data or healthcare information. That's part of the job because that's how they get paid. It's also about prolonging that. So threat actors get paid by prolonging the incident because they've stolen the data or they've encrypted the data and locked it down, and you can't touch it until they say you can, or you can recover it. If they've not touched your backup protection systems, then you can just recover yourself. Job's a good one. So that's the first thing they do. They go in there, and this is why role-based access, this is why MFA, this is why zero trust architecture is key for customers. Because once they're in there, they can do anything to backups. They can even do simple things like we were just talking about before. Just turn off the backups. Let the success rates run, but there's no content to it. And if you say, that if they're keeping 2-week backups on a roll-in, 2 weeks later, no backups. It's quite easy. Or just back up the same stuff, or just turn off a couple of little bits, the bits that we're interested in, turn those off. 9 times out of 10, what they do is they kill it. They'll go in there and they'll destroy the master systems. They'll delete the indexes, etc. So recovery is a nightmare because you're scanning, if you're using tapes, you're scanning tapes back in again.
Yeah. The overall fear that we get is, and we see time and time again, is about the recovery piece is as damaging as the initial data lock.
Yes.
We've seen many organisations really struggle to know what data is good, what data has been compromised, reinfecting themselves. So what advice would you give to somebody? How do you verify, once you've been attacked, how do you verify your data again? That must be a massive concern for customers. It
should be. I think it's fair to say. I think some customers still don't understand the concept of that recovery. I think and I talk to a lot of customers have said to me, they get attacked, they do the restore, job's a good one. And actually that just leads to reinfection.
Yeah.
I think what we're saying is there's 2 areas that you need to be focusing on. You need to have a really solid security group that can actually go in there and forensically analyse the data, understand the attack vector, understand what's actually happened, what data's been touched and how. And to be fair, you're going to need to start reporting on this on a regular basis to the regulators anyway. So it's something that needs to be done. I also don't see customers vaulting data. I see customers taking backups of it and taking archives of it, not the same thing. They're not taking vaulted copies in air gaps of their most valuable data or even recovery point data for infrastructure. Yeah. So you can't recover the base infrastructure. And the third thing, they don't clean room. And the clean rooming is one of the most important things of cyber recovery. If you're going to do a response, you're already investigating the contents of that data. How are you actually going to see it? You need an area where you can bring it back. Now, this is always a challenging concept for a customer because it's like a light bulb moment. The customer understands what backup is. They understand what recovery is. They understand the timescales of DR and business continuity planning because they've done it. It's in the DNA. They've done it for years. If you say to them, right, okay, you need to bring that data back and you've got a 5-minute recovery time objective. What if I said to you, you can't recover that for 2 days? And you can't recover that for 2 days because you're having to recover it into a clean room environment. And then security are having to go through and analyse that data. And only when it's clear can you bring it back. Your RTO is out the window in a cyber event. So absolutely critically important for business continuity planning, because not every event is a cyber event. But when it comes to cyber, when it comes to ransomware, you have to go through the clean room process. We've got multiple examples in the market where customers have been hacked. They've gone through a process of checking the data and think it's okay. They've brought it back, but they haven't done it in a clean room process, and they've immediately reinfected themselves. And we have one customer reinfected themselves 14 times.
Bloody hell. I think after 13 you would go, now we're done.
Exactly.
We're done.
Because you just can't find everything. That's the problem, unless
you're
you've
looking for needles in a stack of needles.
Exactly.
It's not even needles in a haystack.
It's needles in needles.
Uh-huh.
And how do you put a time space around that? And this is where I think you start to win conversations with customers when you can articulate the security story in a different way. When you're talking to a customer and saying to them, you've got resiliency categories for your data, you understand how quickly it's coming back, you've got RPO, RTO, you've got a great BCP plan. Throw a rock in the middle of that, and none of that works for a cyber event. You're looking at hours, days, weeks in some cases, depending on the type of the data. But you can structure it in the way that you look at the right stuff first time. With a proper cyber recovery plan. They're having this thought process where they're actually looking at the brand of their company.
Yeah.
And previously, when you've talked about brands, it's always been there's been an earthquake and the data center's gone.
Yeah.
That's not brand damage, to the scale that we're talking about today.
People
with
would
ransomware.
Understand that.
Yeah, with ransomware, at the click of your fingers, your brand can go in the bin. Mm-hmm. And we've seen it over and over again with examples in the market where customers haven't had that capability in place. They've gone into an elongated recovery process, and the brand has died.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of that clean room perspective, it's a great point, because a lot of people speak about the ability to be like, I can instantly recover my backups and I've got all these snapshots again. But the question is, should you? That's the first one. How can technology help with that verification of the clean room data and speed that process up?
So, obviously there's good capabilities in our software. Mm-hmm. We've got clean room capability. Mm-hmm. I would say, how do you speed that up? You speed that up by building this into the DNA of what you do on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. So if you're taking backups and you're taking archive copies, why aren't you taking security copies? Why aren't you keeping a fingerprint track record, say every 5 days, of what your data looks like, and having a security team that are proactively looking at the content of secondary data? Mm-hmm. If they're proactively looking at it, they're seeing incidents, and obviously we've got two types, you've got SOCs, but you've also got automation and AI within the platform itself that can do this. It can give you that level of intelligence. It can report out to XDRs or SIM platforms and give you that level of intelligence, so you can actually make security-led decisions on a regular basis. That's what customers aren't doing today.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes a material difference. Having the process of doing a clean room is great. You have to run it on a regular basis and test it, like with everything. So you need to be doing proper cyber resiliency testing and recovery. You need to do that so, number one, it works, but also, number two, you can see what the timescale is. Mm-hmm. So when you're having that conversation with your CEO that says, I know we said the RTO was 5 minutes, but it's actually 5 days, you've got data that backs it up and says, it's 5 days, but that 5 days is the difference between having your company and not having your company.
Yeah. Or reinfecting yourself 14 times.
Exactly.
And we're still here this time next year.
And that's when you're talking about the price of a piece of software that gives you that capability, all you need to do is look at the level of brand damage and look at the level of regulatory fines. If you've no idea what they've touched, when you tell the regulator, you're going to get fined for not knowing what you're doing. If you don't recover your business in time, you're going to get fined. If you're in financial services, you're going to get fined for affecting the other banks, and. And then there's the personal fines. You can get personally fined as the CEO or the CTO or the CIO, depending on what it was that you've done. And we've seen real examples of that.
In the UK?
Yes.
Yes. Wow.
We've seen examples in the UK and we've seen examples in the US where C-level executives have had personal fines. Yeah. The one that springs to mind is the TSB. Remember the TSB one? Mm-hmm. The CIO there got an £83,000 fine.
Wow. And that really focuses his mind, doesn't it?
Because that's a personal fine. Company's not paying that.
No.
Company got fined in the hundreds of millions. Mm-hmm.
And even from a point of view for the poor people who are involved in that, from a career perspective, it's quite hard, isn't it? if you turn up for a job as the guy who was in charge of TSB when they got locked out, it's a hard thing to get over in a job interview, isn't it?
It can be. It can be, yeah. I mean, it can also be a lesson. It can be a...
Yeah, if you deal with it properly, you say, well, this is what I learned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everything's a journey. And I think with cyber events, the first people that had these properly are now understanding what it was that they went through. And, maybe they were seen as super negative in the way that they went around their job at the time, but nobody really knew what they were doing. And it's the same with everything. Would financial services be where it is today without the hundreds of different financial regulations that are in place? Financial services in 2008 was in a right old mess. Fast forward 12 years, and we've got regulations galore. Some would say too much, but now we've got a very, very clear regulation. They split the regulatory authority in two in the UK for that reason, because it gave you that dual-eye view of the way you were going to do business through financial services. And then you think of other acts that have come in. Like, first of all, we had the operational resiliency piece coming out of 2018 it was, and that concludes in 2025. DORA was built on the top of that. That concludes in 2025. NIS and NIS 2, all these regulations, this is stuff that companies are already doing. And they should already have been doing. And what they're doing is now they're putting a parameter around it and say, I know you're doing it, but this is how you do it properly. And not only are you going to do it properly, we're going to measure you. And if you don't do it properly, we're going to fine you.
Yeah.
And this is how we start to see customers' behaviours changing and looking at software that might have previously seemed as a luxury as being actually the only way that they can get out of jail.
To necessity. So, so you decide that you want to go back over into the customer sphere, and you take over. You take over a large organisation. You go back in as director. What are the first things that you're doing day one, day two, round about backup? So you're brand new at the job. You're sitting in the chair. What are you asking?
The first thing I'm asking is, where's your standard? Where's your data protection standard? So do you have a document that says to me what data protection looks like, how it's carried out, what the process is, how you're testing it, how are the business telling you what that content looks like, and how are they approving its content, and how is that being qualified every year? That is the key thing for me. Second thing is, what have you got? Tell me what your install base looks like.
Yeah.
And if it's a hodgepodge of vendors, that's a challenge as well, because you're looking at a recovery of business data that's going to be spread on one or two or three, maybe heritage vendors, maybe modern vendors like ourselves. There's always a mix in a customer. How are you doing the recovery? DORA is a great example where you've got to put operational resiliency in place. You go into a major bank and they're probably using 3 data protection pieces of software as a minimum. How are you going to apply that process across those 3 when one of them probably doesn't do it very well at all? One of them does it half and the other one does it really well. You can't move all your content. It's like multi-cloud all over again. You can't just put all your data in cloud in seconds and your problem's been solved. It evolves. And I think that's why number one for me would be to go in there and say, what is that standard? What have you got? Agreed with the business on what happens with this data.
Absolutely. And one of the challenges we face, and it's a real challenge for when you're trying to sell a new backup product, when you go into one of these organisations that have mass amounts of backup data on legacy backup systems, how do you deal with the pain of migrating to a net new backup software? Because it's painful.
It is painful. I think, again,
especially with a 7-year retention policy or something like that.
Yeah, it is. And I think the problem with the retention policies as well is they're just random. I haven't been to one customer, and I mean one customer yet, that's come back to me and said, this is my relevant record strategy and this is my data protection policy, and look, they match, because they never do. Usually it's IT saying, I'll keep that for 7 years, or it's the business saying, delete that after 11 years or 12 years or 15 years, because it's this. Let's say it's a mortgage and they want to keep it for 15 years. But that data that they're backing up might have copies of operating systems in that you don't need, or a variety of other things. What you're looking at with legacy data, the biggest challenge you've got is, what do you move and what don't you move? Now, the way I've approached it with customers, I've said to them, Data is the most valuable piece that you've got. You need to know what your data is. Until you know what your data is, you can't monetize it for internal retention purposes. You can't meet regulatory requirements for over and under retention. You can't do anything to do with security on that data. You can't tell what data's been touched in there, how valuable it is, whether it's MVP data or whether it's just copies of my old Christmas shopping lists. You just don't know. And if that's the case, why would you move all that data? If you've got 10 petabytes of data in legacy and you're moving to a modern vendor, you don't want to be moving 10 petabytes of data. You need to classify and index the data. If you classify and index the data, then you can start making defensible decisions against it. Do I need to move that data? Do I need to keep it for what regulatory reason or what relevant record reason? Can I delete it? And if I can delete it, what's my defensible decision behind that? If you index and classify the data, that empowers everything else. If you think about AI and what AI is able to do with secondary data, the reason it can do that is because of classification and indexing. So Cohesity can do that really well because we always classified and indexed our data. So for us to be able to go in and start using AI against that data was actually quite a simple process. We've had AI capability for a few years now, but now it's obviously on steroids now, if you want to put it that like that. We're using retrieval augmented generation, and we're able to use generative AI, natural language processing questions to talk to this data. I'll tell you more about that. But if you think about classification and indexing as a basic against that data, that allows you to then say, well, okay, of that 10 petabyte example, I only need 3. So 7 of it's gone in the bin straight away. Cost savings, data center savings, people savings potentially. You've also got all of the regulatory risk that's been removed. You've got security challenges that have been taken out. The complexity of that data mountain's been removed. And you're only moving what you need to move, and you're only moving it for the period that it needs to be moved to. Yeah. So it's a core thing, I think.
No, absolutely. You touched on it there. Backup's evolving. So backup used to just be seen solely as an overhead. It was a horrible job that was run by IT departments and had to be done. And everyone hates it. But now with the absolute boom in AI, as you say, it's on steroids. It's been about for decades, but it's front and centre now of everyone's consciousness. What we're starting to see is real use cases for privately trained models based on your backup data. So all the information that exists within your business is held within your backup. So why not train a model on it? Then, as you say, then start to get real benefits from that data. Cohesity have been a very early adopter of this, and I think, as you say, it's because the way that you index data anyway. So it puts some structure to the unstructured that then allows you to basically train models on it. But how are you starting to see customers move into that new era where that actual backup data has value?
Yeah, I think it's finally starting to dawn, the realization of the size of that data mountain and the capability of that data mountain. And I go back to 2013, 2014, I was having these discussions about that data because I own that data. It was mountains of the stuff. I couldn't get rid of content because nobody owned it. I didn't understand what it was. It was just backup data. But actually it's secondary data. And if you look at the secondary data market, say there's 100 exabytes of primary data, there's 1,000 exabytes of secondary data, orders of magnitude more. Now, if you've got that content, why wouldn't you want to drive value from it? If you at a basic level, let's say it's a regulatory thing. We've talked about regulatory challenges and over and under retention and reasons why you would do certain things, right? If you understand your data and you can use natural language to be able to ask that data questions that give you the answers that you need in context, why wouldn't you want to do that? And I think up until recently, customers have been very slow at learning what that capability can be because they've just seen AI as, like a Siri or an Alexa or, I can just say this and it'll give me an answer, or like ChatGPT, write me this letter, brilliant. But in the way that we've adopted it using retrieval augmented generation, so we're using retrieval AI, we're using generative AI, we're bringing those two together, we can actually give you a context-based response to the question you've asked, but we can also provide the source to it as well. So we can actually tell you exactly what you're looking for and give you the reason for it. And we can give you a document connection to that. We can give you a one-page summary of it, all the usual stuff that you would want from AI. Because we've got that within our data content. So say, for example, you're dealing with a bank. Bank might have a large language model full of all of its regulations, full of its relevant records, full of all of its case history, its mortgage, anything, massive amounts of data that they've got in there, including legal cases, and criminal cases. You can then ask the secondary data questions. Give me a one-page summary of when this happened, and back it comes. And suddenly you've got access to this mountain of data, hundreds and hundreds of petabytes of secondary data that's just sitting in backup, useless to anybody, has now got a huge amount of value.
Oh, huge. And can you interrogate the attributes of that data? Like, tell me the last time that was accessed and who by? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, most backup data's got metadata anyway.
Yeah.
So you can typically tell who the owner was, when it was written, when it was last accessed, the type of the data. Sometimes you can actually even understand what the content of it is. So if you're able to use AI in a fashion like that, I could use it even basically internally. Tell me all the data that John Smith's been backing up for the last 3 years. I can now charge John Smith's department for storing that data because John Smith's terrible. He keeps all of his old football videos, right? And that's the power of it at a low level. You can use it in a more intelligent way within operations in the way that we were talking before. You can use AI to spot discrepancies. It can go into a lot more detail now. Tell me how many misses I've had on that backup job in the last 3 weeks. When backup administrators understand it really well, but the business tend not to. You have a blip in a backup and it's a miss. You just missed 24 hours of your schedule. What happens if you have 2 misses? How many people are actually looking for multiple misses in a row in backup administration? Not many. Yeah. There should be, because you've just completely eroded your BCP, and the business don't know. Are you telling them? Because they decided that they were going to do a server upgrade that day, you missed it for 2 days over the weekend, and now your tape's not gone off site until the Monday night, so now it's 3 days. Do the business know? Is there an automated way to be able to produce a schedule using AI that says this is what happened in your business unit today from a data protection perspective? Good, miss, good, fail. And there's the incident records, and this is the process that's been, AI is powerful. It can give you so much more from an operational perspective.
I think it at the moment, I think it is kind of classified to that operational perspective, but the possibilities are there to go right into every level of the business. So for instance, if you have finance data backed up and you have all your project data, compare the profitability of the company over the last 10 years against what projects we were doing, and you might spot some really interesting facts. That your best product is actually a dog.
Exactly.
And it's
powerful. It's powerful intelligence that you can now get as a business unit. How many major transformation programs that run for 2 or 3 years in a big business actually go back and look at what the TCO was? None.
No.
I would say probably none, because usually it's the life of a CIO and he's probably moved on by then. Yeah. But 9 times out of 10, I would say they don't look, because they've got to the next point where they've rebudgeted, or they're on a mission. We've got to land this. AI can give you that level of understanding around data content. It can give you a different perspective on things. And like I said, you can use it for good. You can use it for answering your regulatory questions. You can use it for answering fact-based questions. You can use it for criminal history. I've been privy to multiple criminal cases where the police have made requests for data for individuals. We've had to pull tapes. We've had to do restores, days and weeks, months of effort to get that done. AI is a question and an answer, and a question and an answer, and you evolve this all the time, and then you get a report. And the report, because it's source-based, it's context, it gives you the actual figures, it tells you exactly where you need to look. It's all there. Yeah. You've just taken months of work and diluted it down to a couple of minutes.
I think that's going to be absolutely huge for our industry.
It's massive for the industry.
Absolutely huge. That's a good side of AI, but clearly there's going to be a whole load of new threats coming from AI. Are we starting to see any of these emerging yet?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, I would say, I've spoken to a few customers. I've spoken with colleagues at events, from other vendors, and we are seeing that trend. Ironically, we're seeing threat actors using AI, because why wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
If you can train ChatGPT to write code to do a particularly malicious act, and we know it can do that because it's just trained from large language data available on the internet. Yeah. So why wouldn't they do that?
But you can actually download the ChatGPT 3.5 model and run it on your laptop. Yeah. People think these are big, complicated things. And in fact, the data they're trained on is huge.
Yeah.
But the actual models themselves are relatively small pieces of software that you can run on your laptop.
Exactly. Funnily enough, we were talking about an automated car manufacturer and how their obsession was actually focusing on data protection of the model, not data protection of the training data. And actually, it probably should have been both.
Yeah.
Definitely looking at the training data, because that's the crown jewels. That's what told it what to do. And in the future, regulators are going to be the wanting to know that. Oh, your automated car didn't stop at that traffic light and it hit the lady crossing the road.
Yeah, why?
Why? What code? It's no different to the way regulatory authorities make plane manufacturers keep blueprints of wings for 40 years after the manufacturing date. All of these events are going to come in and companies need to think about this when they're going forward. And that's a great example, I think, of AI data. Nobody's really thinking about their training data. Why I told it to do a particular thing and it did it, and now it's wrong. I need to know why it was wrong and why we told it was it wrong. Is that going to be a criminal thing in the future, or is it just going to be a corporate?
Yeah. Aye, who's liable for what the AI did, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
No one, somebody, who knows?
And I think, we saw a good example over in the US a few months back where a threat actor had used AI to attack a company, and it had actually used AI to report back on the data content, and the threat actor told the SEC what the data was that it had touched. The company that had been attacked couldn't do that.
Yeah.
They reported within their 3-day window, but they didn't know what data had been touched. So the threat actor, the next day, told them. So the SEC are fining the company now because they didn't know.
Yeah, that's absolutely staggering. So one of the things that I think caught a lot of people by surprise was Cohesity's purchase of Veritas.
Yes.
Seemed to come out of nowhere, a well-guarded secret. And I guess that makes a lot of sense, the amalgamation of the two companies. So from a Cohesity's point of view, what is there a roadmap for how these two technologies are going to work with each other? What can we expect?
It's difficult for me to be able to talk about it at the moment because it's an ongoing process between the two companies. So I'm not able to go into a massive amount of detail on it. But what I will say, we have got NDA conversations that can happen at a senior level to just give advice and guidance from both Veritas and both Cohesity on what to expect in the future.
Awesome. Nice one. Well, we're out of time. So I would... the chat's been great. I think we could have went on for another couple of hours probably on backup. So really appreciate you coming on. Thanks very much.
No problem. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Cheers now.